Welcome back to Language Sofa Podcast. My name's Ben Levi, and in this we're going to be exploring further the connections between language, communication and the world around us. So today I'm joined by a very special guest, renowned sports broadcaster Matt Smith. If you've ever watched major football tournaments, Champions League nights, or some of the biggest sporting events around the world, chances are you've heard his voice bringing the action to life. But what we might not know is that Matt's career isn't just built on his passion for sport. Language has played a huge role in shaping his journey. His ability to connect with players and managers and people all around the world and throughout his life has led to some really unique and memorable experiences and shaped his career in some ways. So in this episode we're going to dive into the power of language in football and broadcasting, as well as careers. From different stories, from different names in football, but also in broadcasting, and how speaking different languages has helped him break down the barriers. So Matt will be sharing his insights, experiences, and some different funny and interesting experiences he's had along the way. So if you're a football fan, a language enthusiast, or love hearing great stories, sit back, relax, and join us on Language Sofa. So, Matt, welcome to Language Sofa Podcast.
Thank you very much, Ben. Nice to be part of it.
Excellent. So, no, obviously, really appreciate you being here and sharing your experiences. So, just to kick off, so obviously, what an incredible career you've had, and a fantastic variety of experiences along the way. And like you said, languages have shaped, especially your education at the start of your career, but also your career in media. So it'd be great to hear about your journey up to where you are now, and how languages have impacted this along the way.
Sure. Well, I'll try not to make it too long and boring, but of being quite old now, there's quite a lot to explain. But let's start somewhere in the beginning. So yeah, I studied languages at school, like a lot of kids, and quite enjoyed them. I did French and German. They were the ones that were on offer at my secondary school. Nothing at primary, although I know kids these days do start at primary in some cases, which I think is great. But in my case, it was French and German at secondary school. I took French on to A-level and German part of the way to A-level. And I preferred French to German, if I'm honest. I liked both, but I particularly enjoyed French. And I kind of got, like I suppose a lot of kids, towards the end of my A-levels. My others were, let me remember, history and economics.
Okay.
And I should have done English, but anyway, I got persuaded to do economics, which I didn't like. But there we are. That's another story.
Yeah.
So I applied again, slightly kind of bewilderedly and not knowing what else to do, to universities for various courses. And I was accepted onto a place at Sheffield to do modern languages and politics.
Mm-hmm.
So I started there, and when I got there, again, it sounds quite woolly all this, but actually I didn't really quite realise until I got there. But you had to take one of the languages you studied at school, which in my case was French, and the other could have been one of German, Spanish, or Italian.
Okay.
And as I say, I wasn't overly enamoured with German at school, so I chose another of the Latin languages, and on a slight whim, really, I chose Italian. So that's how I kind of started on that language.
Yeah. You almost realised that made more sense than continuing with the German, which is interesting.
Well, yeah, I don't know. It was more perhaps a feeling than anything quite so rational. But anyway, it worked out great because
we don't make rational choices at that age, unfortunately.
No, sometimes not. But I have a lifelong love of all things Italian. So that came from that. It hadn't appeared before that, but it definitely came from that whimsical decision.
Yeah.
So and that degree involved a year in Sheffield, then a year in Italy, a year in France, and a year back in Sheffield, which I absolutely loved. And that cemented my love for, and hopefully some knowledge of languages. Managed to pass my degree, and again, not being quite sure what to do with all of that knowledge and experience, I wanted to go back to Italy. So I applied to, or wrote really, to newspaper correspondents who were based for English-speaking newspapers and magazines in Rome, some of whom were good enough to offer me some work if I went and rented a room and kind of set myself up as a starter.
Yeah.
And that led to a traineeship in a Associated Press bureau in Rome, which is an American press agency. That led eventually after some time in Italy, to a job at the Financial Times back in London, then to the BBC, ITV, and BT. So that's the kind of the short version of a long
Yeah.
journey
No.
from there to here.
Yeah, and it's very interesting, obviously, how that initial decision to go, oh, I'm going to add on Italian as my add-on one. That there was obviously some kind of there's some reason along the line that actually worked out really well. And that, I think it's really strange how those decisions work out in the end. But I think
I mean, I probably on a practical level should have chosen Spanish because I think globally that's a more useful language for obvious reasons. Mm-hmm. And probably that's true in football as well, although I've never looked back with any regret at all. And I have used my French, Italian, and I have kind of, because of those two being Latin-based, I have developed and kind of self-taught a level of Spanish and Portuguese, which I do use professionally for interviewing players and coaches and stuff. So
I think once you've got, because I speak Spanish and French as my main two, but then I found when I've been in Italy or Portugal, I mean, you can definitely understand. It takes longer to respond and figure it out, but you can definitely get by, can't you? And I think having that base of Latin-based languages, it's a lot easier to then to go from there. So it is. So obviously, I wanted to ask you, with spending that time in those countries, like you said, during your education, and then following that, would you say that that being immersed in the culture and that everyday life of that, would you say that kind of inspired you further to engage with languages, and would you say that pushed you further with that because you were in the environment around them?
Definitely, there is no substitute really for in terms of language learning and the gateway or the doorway that allows you to walk through. There's no substitute for being in a country that speaks that language. Now, obviously, in the case of French, that could be a number of countries. It isn't just France, and that would be true also with Spanish. Obviously, with Italian, whilst it is spoken a little in other parts of the world through its slight colonial past, that's a much smaller part of its history. So essentially, if you want to learn Italian, you go to Italy.
And that's not the worst thing. Exactly, it's a great place to be. So
and in my case, my time there, I was based with two other students in Verona, and some of the other students on the course were either in Turin or Pisa, and we had a great time in Verona. Although it quickly became apparent to me that we were studying at the university. We didn't get jobs like a lot of language students these days. We didn't get a work placement. We were just academic students, so we went to lectures and immersed ourselves with tutorials and all that kind of stuff. But it in lots of parts of Italy, and this included Verona, the students generally, almost exclusively, were from the local area. Okay. So they didn't live away from home. They lived at home and went to university during the day, and then had their own kind of social circles that came from their childhood, kind of after and outside lessons. So it wasn't the most sociable place to just parachute into. So after a while, I inquired as to whether I could go and spend a little time down in Pisa, where some of the other students that I was in contact with from Sheffield were having a much more sociable time, because there were students from all over Italy, in particular, because it's a very old university, Pisa, a lot of students from the south, where there are fewer universities, and therefore they have to leave home in order to study. They've travelled to places like Rome, Pisa, Bologna, some of the more famous and successful and old universities in Italy. So there was a much more of a mix of people from different parts of the country, which meant there was more of a scene of getting to know each other and hanging out and doing stuff. And of course, that's kind of part of the love that you develop for the place, is getting to know people. It's always through people that you learn. And you learn so much. You learn about their customs, their habits, their idiosyncrasies linguistically, you know, how they have their coffee, to what kind of pizza they eat, and all the little bits and pieces that end up being the fabric of your love for the place and the language.
Definitely. I think it's that, and it makes you, I find out, because I lived in Spain when I was younger, it made you a bit more, not even accepting, but kind of understanding of other cultures, and kind of makes you open your eyes a bit, I think, and understand that people don't necessarily all think in the same way as me. As English people, there is a tendency to be a bit closed-minded sometimes. I think everyone should mold to how we are. So I think I think it does open your eyes when you spend a bit of time abroad, and you are the outsider at that time. You do have to.
Yes, well,
So
we are lazy, aren't we, as a nation, because our language, through our own history, and then obviously more recently through the history of the United States, is such a dominant force globally
yeah,
that we allow everybody else to do the hard work, do
mm,
the heavy lifting, and learn English, which is
yeah,
not an easy language to learn actually. So
yeah.
phrasal, and it's idiosyncratic, and the pronunciation is very
Oh, it's
whimsical, and
mad. Yeah,
it's
yeah,
fiddly. So that's part of it, isn't it? We are a bit lazy, and also we're an island race, aren't we? Like certainly an
yeah,
island nation, and so
mm,
we're a bit closeted in our outlook at times. I
yeah,
think.
yeah,
I wish we weren't, but we are.
mm,
Hence, I guess Brexit and all that's gone with that.
yeah,
Clearly, as a language student and someone that's lived in parts of Europe, I don't know if you feel the same. I certainly feel strongly that that was a terrible turn of
yeah.
events.
I think I was naive to it at the time. I don't know. I don't really go into politics too much. I try and my life's,
Yeah, no,
yeah,
regardless of your political views, it just culturally, to me,
yeah, yes,
it created a barrier that
yeah,
previously hadn't felt so
definitely.
visible.
I think what was sold with it as well to a lot of people was inaccurate, and there's lots of elements of that. And unfortunately, it's you know, I think we appreciate how that movement across borders is so important. I think,
Yeah,
and sort of being closed minded to going, this is our country and all that stuff. I think
yeah,
that's antiquated. I think it's really important to, you know, it's the world. We should be able to share our knowledge and share our beliefs and be all right with each other's differences. I think that's a really important element. So
for
yeah,
sure, for sure. And I
yeah,
think, yeah, certainly as a language student, we've obviously both, been through that prism, and it enriches your life. There's no doubt.
yeah,
Even if you just look at it selfishly, you get so much from it.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
that's a great thing to have for the rest
yeah.
of your time on Earth.
Absolutely. So, no, going back to your broadcasting career, obviously you've worked with the BBC, ITV, BT Sport, TNT, Talk Sport, which I listen. That's my journey to and from school is Talk Sport all the
Okay.
way. Normally listen to Ali McCoist having a go at the other pundits on there, but yeah. So so what role would you say languages have played in as part of your interactions or communications with people maybe that
Mm.
you've interviewed, or has it helped build relationships with people within that field?
Definitely. Yeah. It was a point of kind of difference and an advantage to me. Obviously, because I'd lived in Italy both as a student and France as a student, but then I'd gone back at the end of my degree to live in Italy as a period, as I said, as a kind of young cub newspaper reporter.
Yeah.
I'd had a lot of exposure to their obsession with football, which certainly mirrors the one that we have in this country.
Mm-hmm.
And they have, as I'm sure people know now, they have sports daily newspapers that focus a lot on football and their other passions, motorsport and the other sports that they're into in Italy. And it's a similar story in France with L'Equipe and other big newspapers. Obviously, Spain has a very similar culture. So there are parts of the world not that far from here where sport plays a big part of the everyday conversation.
Yeah.
And that really opened my eyes to all of that and gave me a deep knowledge of it. Because I used to read those newspapers every day.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was a great way to learn the language, the idiosyncrasies of the language, how they used to use kind of quirky phrases in a football or sports context, and that stayed with me. And so I brought a lot of that back with me. And when my career turned from news into sport at the BBC, I suddenly had this kind of facility that I also had in news as well, but it gave me a gateway into European football. And when I joined ITV in particular, and then obviously BT, I have effectively followed the path of the Champions League and the other European competitions for the last 25 years, really. And that's been fantastic for me to be involved in that year in, year out, and to make all those trips that I have around Europe and beyond. And the languages have definitely come in useful really often.
I guess, yeah, because I think as soon as you, as soon as you speak someone in their language, whether it's a footballer or anyone, if even those little communications, you suddenly see them open up. You're like, oh, okay, you respect me. You're showing that you value me, and it works, doesn't it, on all levels with that?
Definitely, yeah. And of course, it doesn't. You don't have to go abroad to do that. There are now the Premier League that we cover here, as well as the Champions League. is obviously populated by people from all over the world, and they're not just European. Obviously, there are a lot of South Americans and people from parts of the African continent who speak French and sometimes Portuguese as a first language. So I remember when Darwin Núñez first arrived at Liverpool, I was sent to interview him in his first couple of days at Liverpool a couple of years ago. And that clearly had to be in Spanish. And actually, his English is still a work in progress. I think it's fair to say. And he's not that confident in it. But I had to kind of get my ear around Uruguayan Spanish, which is, as you will know, a little bit of a jump from Castellano or kind of mainland European Spanish. So the pronunciation certainly is quirky different.
Definitely.
So, and you want to understand as much as you can of what he's saying, because otherwise you're asking questions into a void, aren't you? If you're not across those answers, then it's not a conversation. You're just asking.
It doesn't flow. That's right. Yeah. So how interesting. So you're part of
fluency. It was a good thing.
Yeah. And also like you're kind of almost welcoming someone like that who might not have had that many interactions in their own language. So it's a really nice. It's a different experience, isn't it, when you can do that? But yeah, so with that, in talking about interviews with people, have there been any sort of standout moments where you would say, if I hadn't had my language skills at this moment, obviously apart from that one, there obviously have been more where you'd say, if I didn't have my language skills, this might have been a different story, and you might not have got your point across?
Well, there's been a number of times where we could only arrange interviews with players or coaches in their own language. And if that was obviously one of the ones that I can converse in, then that made it possible. And if I couldn't have done that, then we wouldn't have been able to do the
actually enabled those interviews.
Yeah. Now, generally, again, partly because I think we are not that open-eared as a nation, on the interviews that we record before live coverage, if you like, on the day before, often when those players and coaches are available. We often do those in their language, so in French, Italian, Spanish, etc., and we translate them and we put subtitles underneath.
Okay. So they're done before. Okay.
Yeah, but obviously on the day of a game or straight afterwards, on the day of the game, but often in the post-match interviews, in a Champions League context, you're given the opportunity to speak to either only the English speakers as an English broadcaster, or you can offer up other languages.
Okay.
But obviously, if you do, that interview then has to be effectively, you have to do the direct translation back and forth as you're doing the interview, which gets quite long-winded.
Get a bit clunky,
we're not that into that. But occasionally, it's the only chance to speak to somebody really important. So, for instance, this week, tomorrow, in fact, I'm travelling to Rotterdam to cover Feyenoord against Inter in the Champions League. Now, Robin van Persie obviously has taken over at Feyenoord, and his English is probably better than mine, so no issues there. But Simone Inzaghi, who's the Italian coach of Inter Milan, to my knowledge, doesn't speak English, certainly not confident enough to do a broadcast interview in it.
Yeah.
So the only way you can speak to him pre and post-match, and in my case it'll be post-match, will be in Italian. And therefore, if TNT want me to do that, I will do the translation back and forth as the interview unfolds.
That'll be fantastic to see. I'll definitely keep an eye out.
And that is a great gift that you can bring to the job.
No, of course. No, obviously I'll have a look at that. I don't tend to follow Champions League much, being a West Ham fan.
We wish. European adventures, Ben.
We have. We've done our little bit. And that was enjoyable. But I think like you said, the opportunities that gives you, for example, being able to interview someone like that must be fascinating as well. And because obviously they just wouldn't be able to interview them. So I think that's fascinating. But in terms of those communications, has there ever been a standout funny moment of lost in translation, or someone you've interviewed, you've gone, wow, that's been a strange moment or a funny moment?
Yeah. Well, yes. So when Carlo Ancelotti was at Everton, I went to interview him at the Everton training ground. He obviously speaks pretty good English, but he was telling me a funny story that when he'd moved into where he was staying in kind of the Crosby, Formby area of coastal North Liverpool, he used to like riding around on his bike when the weather was all right for a bit of fresh air when he wasn't at work. And if he passed Liverpool fans who spotted who it was, they used to throw him a few
choice words.
Choice words, exactly, in their broad Scouse accent. And I think because the accents obviously can be quite strong, I think initially he said I'm not sure if I'm hearing it right. I said, well, what does it sound like? So he told me what it sounded like. I said, oh yeah, I think what they're saying is, what you can imagine they're saying. We don't need to dwell exactly on the specifics. So he said, well, so what do you do in that situation? So I said, well, if I were you, I'd say it straight back to him. So he said, right, I will. So then I saw him a few months later for another interview, and he said, oh, it's working a treat. Everywhere I go on my bike, all the Liverpool fans tell me to off, and I say, and you can off as well. And it apparently goes down great.
That's it.
People love it. So
they appreciate
he gives as good as he gets. Yeah. Languages in practice.
That's right. And so yeah, you've got him through that situation, hopefully.
I don't know if you needed any help particularly. I think it was more a question of whether it was rude or not. But
yeah,
he's a man of the world, a man of great experience.
Again, it's a cultural norm, isn't it? Not that the cultural norm is that Scouse people hurl abuse at people, but this it's understanding.
Just Everton managers or Liverpool managers, depending on their
right.
Quality, yeah.
Vice versa, yeah. So either way around. But no, that's great. So from your perspective, because obviously I'm in education, I'm a teacher of Spanish and French, and obviously I'm constantly trying to not only teach students but give them a reason for doing it as well, and that's quite tricky at times. Sometimes boys don't connect with it, and they don't really know why, and it takes a lot of motivation. So from your perspective, what sort of advice would you give someone in terms of what languages have done for your life and career, and giving importance to languages in that?
So it's made a massive difference to me professionally in a job that I'm sure lots of people would like to do. And I've been lucky enough to do a job that's very rewarding and a bit like having a hobby almost for a job. So I'm very conscious of that. I'm very aware of that. And part of the reason I think I've been able to stay in that industry and work in it successfully for the last 25, 30 years is the fact that I bring skills like languages to the table. And I think it underpins an appreciation of not just languages other than English, but it gives me an appreciation of the English language, because I think once you understand how languages work and how they differ one from the next, it enriches your base for your own language. And I've taken more and more interest in the words that form our own language and how to use them best, because obviously that's part of my job as a storyteller.
You have to think a lot about what you're saying.
Yeah. Well, words are my business, really. So I think it extends back into your own language. I think it bounces back into your own appreciation, your own sense of articulation in your own language, which is important, I think, in my profession. But I would say to anybody who was watching this or listening to this, that it goes beyond any walk of life professionally. It goes into the kind of life you want to live and the kind of world you want to be part of. I think it's that important. I think if you want to travel and see, we're only here for a short time, each and every one of us. If you want to see the world around you and appreciate the amazing places and people within it, then languages are your gateway. They are how you open doors. They are how you get to know people. And you will never, for one moment, regret even a few words. Clearly, the more you know, the more enriching it becomes. But even a few words make such a difference. It opens doors and makes your journeys to wherever you end up going so much happier and fulfilling for you. It pays you back 100 times for the effort you put in. And yes, I understand that young people in particular, for whatever reason, boys turn away instinctively often from language learning and seem to find it kind of a bit pointless or a bit too hard, or just something they think, well, what good will that do me? But if you think about, for instance, and I know this might seem flippant, but if you think about the way we learn language, our own language, across the Atlantic into the United States, and how we appreciate American culture for the idiosyncrasies that we pick up about how they use their version of English, whether that's in song or in film or literature, any kind of obviously cultural setting, but even in business, whatever walk of life you're in, just your ability to understand English as it's spoken around the world. And the same could be said for Australia, Canada, and so many other parts of the world, into large parts of Africa, etc. English is spoken so widely that your jump into those different cultures through English helps you and gives you a lot back. So think about how you can do that same thing with all the other languages that might be available to you, and the cultures that you would understand that are so more removed from our own, perhaps. If you went to China or South Korea or any part of the world where culturally there's a big shift from maybe west to east or north to south or whatever it might be, whether it's about food or anything really, your appreciation for the place you're in and the people you're standing next to and hopefully talking to and listening to, because it's as much about listening as it is about talking. It's not just about our voice, it's about our ears. And that is the bigger part of the joy of language, is your ability to understand what other people have got to say.
Well, I think they're the most inspirational words I've ever heard. I'm going to play that back to my students because they need to hear that. They need to hear that. They're sick of hearing me saying it.
It will pay them back. It always
absolutely
has paid me back. I've never regretted for one moment being a language student, and I still am. I'm still very much. We're all students, aren't we?
Absolutely. Are you continuing learning any more languages, or are you?
Yeah, well, I work. I keep telling myself I'm going to do something a bit more formal, but time hasn't allowed really for me to do that. Although that's also a slight admission of guilt and laziness on my part. But I have worked in my own way at developing my Spanish and Portuguese, at least professionally, for the purposes of the job. And I would love to develop them further, because but to do that, what I'd really like to do is go and spend more time in those two countries, which I do find really interesting again, in lots of different ways. I find Portugal and Spain, really places that I'd love to see more of.
And obviously a very important point, which I know you spoke to me before about. Probably the most important thing is you met your wife through being on the same course. True. So look at that,
Yes, and she was an Italian and French teacher initially at secondary school, having been a teacher of English as a foreign language when we lived in Italy. And she now teaches in a primary school, but part of her remit within the primary school is teaching Spanish to year 5s and 6s, which she really enjoys.
Look at that. That is just great. And that's the best thing about it all. There you go.
It is the gift that keeps on giving.
That's it. So, no, Matt, I really appreciate your time to talk about this. And I think it's been absolutely fascinating, interesting. And no, I really appreciate you coming on to talk to me.
Not at all, Ben. I've really enjoyed it. It's a little trip down my own memory lane, but hopefully of some use to the viewers and listeners, and may they take their own journeys.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Matt.
My pleasure.
I'll see you later.
Cheers, Ben.
Cheers, then. So thank you for tuning in. This was episode 4 of Language Sofa Podcast, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.